Mic check. We all good out there? I hope. Hope everybody's doing all right on this Saturday night. We'll talk. Want to talk a little bit about special teams tonight. If there was anybody out there that wanted to talk some special team stuff, obviously it's 1/3 of the game. It's one of the three phases of the game, and it's something that I think sometimes doesn't get enough interest. It's something that I don't know if I don't want to say people don't take it seriously, but I think it's something sometimes it just gets kind of lost in the shuffle because there's so much offense, defense talk and schematically offensive, defensive stuff. And I think everybody gets all kind of hyped up and wound up about offense and defense, X and O's. And I think, a lot of people miss the boat. There's so many X and O's and great schemes and really, intriguing, interesting things with special teams, and you can make it as funky as you want to or as simple as you want to. And I think sometimes for whatever reason, people get lost on offense and defense and all the odd front, even front talk and coverage talk and, blitzes and pressures. And then, on offense, obviously all the different system talk and, air raid talk and wing tee talk and flex bone talk and read game and RPOs and everything else, that I think it's so easy, for people to kind of get lost in the fact that, special teams is not only 1/3 of the game, but it can be really, really interesting if you kind of dive into it. There's a lot of neat things. I really enjoy it. Obviously, being a head coach, you have to put a priority on special teams, and you have to be willing to put a lot of time and effort into special teams if you want to be good. But when you really start studying and you look at different things, there really are a lot of funky things out there that you can do. And I think, just like some of these great offensive and defensive minds, I think, I think there's a lot of people out there that do a lot of really cool things with special teams and make it unique and make it different. And you could be as aggressive or as passive as you want to with it, much like offense and defense. And I just feel like, to me, I really enjoy special teams. I enjoy doing special teams. I enjoy all the little nuances with it. So figured we'd take a little break from offense, defense, and talk some special team stuff and, see what everybody likes out there, what they do, how they do it, what they like to do, how they practice it. And like I said, you can keep it as simple as you want to, or I agree with you, Michael. Once you have your system down and you start doing things that you do and you do them well, and you get kids to buy into it, and then they learn how to do some things really well. It makes other people prepare, and the more things that you do that might be little wrinkles or nuances, I think people have to prepare for those things, and then it takes some time away from their offensive and defensive preparing. And I think it can just kind of give you a leg up, in some things. And like one of the things I always choose to do muddle huddle stuff with after touchdowns. And one of the reasons I do so is teams have to spend time preparing for that. And then you bring up a great point, Michael. When teams have to start preparing for that, you steal a little bit of time away from maybe their offense or their defensive practice, or you give them one more thing that they have to look at or do, or pay attention to, quote unquote, because it is a very important part of the game, especially obviously in a game with the scoreboard, every point matters. So if you can occasionally get 2 instead of 1, you're kind of stealing a point here or there. But, I think, those things just, again, it's also, it gives you a little bit of life sometimes when things get, maybe redundant. It gives your kids life and energy, and, it becomes exciting, when you're doing muddle huddle stuff and you change from week to week and you wrinkle it from week to week. And, Again, the opponent has to prepare for it. They have to figure out maybe which one you're using that week, which 2 or 3 plays, or what formation you're using, and then I think from a field goal standpoint, I think it kind of sometimes has a tendency to slow the rush up a little bit, because if if you have a couple muddle huddle deals that you use and you do them really well, they spend so much time lining up to the muddle, but that sometimes by the time you shift back, they don't really get a good rush. We've done some things with muddle huddle where we've actually kicked it from the muddle huddle because teams are expecting a play to be run and they don't have anybody set up to rush. So we've actually snapped it and kicked it with only 1 or 2 blockers in there, because you don't even get a rush and you surprise people. So, just all kind of little things like that kind of, make things interesting. When you start talking about punt and you start talking about different styles of punt, whether it be spread punt, pro punt, shield punt, whatever you want to call, or talk about the couple different things. And then when you get a little bit funky with formations and alignments and you get fakes in there, I think you make people prepare. I think you make people watch more film. I think you make people dig a little bit deeper into what you're doing from a special team standpoint. And like I said, I think the biggest thing for us that I enjoy the most is, the fact that it gets our kids excited. When you wrinkle some things from week to week, the kids want to know, are there any fakes in, what fakes are in, and then certain guys, want to be involved in the fake. So anytime you're doing like shield punt stuff and you have the big boys in on the shield, they always, they always want to be involved in the fakes with either a direct snap or a screen or something that they can do because they want the football. And so, it's always one of those, deals to me that was very interesting. NFL roster, I wonder if you'll see true special teamers again, like Steve Tash instead of today's players. I think there's always those guys out there, Chase. Sorry. I think the roster size obviously affects that a little bit, but I think there's always going to be those types of guys out there that maybe aren't 1 or 2 deep on their roster, and maybe not ever crack the starting lineup or be as good of a player in the starting lineup as they are a special teams player. You bring up a great point about the roster. I think the roster has a lot to do with that. But at the same time, I think those guys still exist, in enough NFL franchises. I still think there are guys that are making their living, especially when you start talking about obviously long snappers and things like that. Those guys are, making their living as specialists. And I think the Steve Taskers of the world back in the day, and even when Bill Bates was a really good special teams player, he was a good safety too, but there were so many of those guys that were just really good players, and whether it be the roster they were on or the unit they were with, they just weren't good enough to crack the offense or the defense, but they were solid football players, and we try to tell kids that all the time. Special teams, you can make a name for yourself. There's guys that make a lot of money in the league that make their money playing special teams, not offense or defense. So we're always trying to convince kids of that. Still believe in blocking punts? If so, do you scheme to bring pressure? Secondly, do you have a special teams? Yeah, we always usually have a special teams coordinator, or we have a coordinator, and then we kind of try and divvy them up between some guys that you might give one guy kickoff, one guy kick return, or you might split the special teams up amongst your coaches and say, you got the gunners, you got the shield guys, or you got whatever it may be, depending on what special team unit it is. But the reason I believe in trying to block punts is punting is so hit or miss in high school that a lot of times you spend time setting up returns, and the other teams don't always have great punters, and the ball might go sideways. It may be a line drive, and you end up spending time setting up returns, and it's not so much that the returns are not good, or the schemes are not good, but it's the fact that you may never get a chance to return just because the punters aren't always the greatest in high school. So I learned that the hard way when I first started as a head coach 22 years ago. Obviously came from a GA in college, and learned from a lot of guys that hey Hunter, how you doing, bud? Learned from a lot of guys, in the college setting, and you were always working on wall returns and different type of hold up returns and stuff like that. And when I was a young coach, it was really all I knew how to do. So we spent a lot of time on returns. And then it took me 2 or 3 years to kind of figure out that we're spending all this time on returns and we're really not getting a lot of opportunities to return the ball because the punters aren't as good as the college game. So we went more to a aggressively trying to block more punts, and that was simply because of that reason, not so much a philosophical reason for being aggressive to block punts. We went to it more as a time efficiency type deal because we felt like the returns that we were teaching, we were spending too much time on things that we never got a chance to use because the punters weren't as good. So sorry to make a long answer out of that, but that's why I always believe more in blocking punts. Yeah, rugby style is great. Great in high school. It's easy. It's usually easy to protect. You can usually get an athletic kid back there if you don't have a punter, at least somebody that can kind of roll out and at least get it on the ground rolling and do some things. So, it makes it tough to return or set up returns because, the balls get punted kind of funky. So I think, excuse me, I think that stuff is always a good, rugby's always going to be a good system in high school. When you, the thing that I like that I think is really good when you tie rugby in with shield punts, because once you start shield punting, you're always going to eventually see 4 in the A gap. They're going to try and get, depending on what style of shield you use or how you protect it, they're going to get 4 guys in, double A gaps, and try and get 4 on the shield and do some things that way. So as soon as you can rugby out of as soon as you can rugby out of the shield, I think those two things protect each other so well. Yeah, Boise State's always been fun to watch on offense, defense, special teams. They do some really good stuff. Last season, my team's base punt returns an all-out punt rush, and I told our returner to just fair catch every time. I don't think that's a bad deal at all. I think, like we said, like I was just saying, I think you'll get more mileage out of trying to block punch. You'll get more practice time efficiency. Because you're not spending as much time teaching returns. And then you'd be surprised when you talk about special teams, you talk about hidden yardage all the time. So hidden yardage would be that ball that you don't field and it hits the ground and rolls for another 15, 18 yards. There's all those little hidden yardage deals in the game statistically. And if you could get kids to get up there and fair catch punts and get really good at it and just be able to field punts, I think that's a great way to go about playing, because I think eventually you will block one. And when you don't, if a kid fair catches it, then you may never get flip the field type returns. But at the same time, you're going to win that hidden yardage game because you're always fielding punts and not letting the ball get on the ground and run around. Is Pat Kewan different than Pat Kerwin? I know there was back in the day, the Jets, Pat Kerwin he was a scout with the Jets, and then he got into media and some or front office work or something else. But I don't know if it's somebody different or not. Chase. Yeah, that's a great. Yeah, Pat Kerwin was a New York guy. He was with the Jets when I was growing up, and that's a great quote. I might have to get my hands on that book. What's Take Your Eye Off the Ball? Yeah, I'm gonna look that up, Chase. It sounds like it might be an interesting read. But that's a great. It is a great quote. They are very much like airbags or cholesterol that, you don't notice until there's a problem. So, I just think it for whatever reason, it's not as sexy a part of the game as offense or defense. And I really don't know why, because like I said, there's so many neat and interesting little things that you can do. And then if you want to get really good at it, there's also so many neat techniques and fundamentals that need to be taught. Like it used to be back in the day. I know when I was in high school, you would put all your best athletes on kickoff, and you would hope that all your best runners and tacklers, you would hope that you'd be able to get down the field and tackle, and you didn't spend a lot of time doing drills. And I know when I was a kid growing up, I never really learned all the different nuances going down on kickoffs and lane, running. You always knew about your lane and how to stay. Everything was about your lane, stay in your lane, but nobody ever talked to you really about how to avoid the first level in the speed zone. I never really heard about the speed zone until I got into college and what the speed zone was and getting on a clock and timing guys through the speed zone. And then, avoiding butt side. And then if you're 8 or less, button press. So in other words, when you got inside of, 8 or 10 yards of the football, now you can't go around blocks anymore. You got to button press and take blocks on, and how to avoid butt side and all those things. So there's so many little nuances even in kickoff coverage that sometimes people just make this physical bravado type deal where if you got a bunch of fast guys that are really physical and like hitting people, you can just run down on kickoff. And I don't think it's that simple. I think you should be teaching it in drill work and different types of drills that you do, whether they be on bags or, like we very rarely ever go live during special teams. We do a lot of drill work. We do a lot of work on bags just because, the bodies throughout the course of the year and the contact, and, you don't want to lose guys. Special teams are so important, but the distance and the spacing is so huge that there's a lot of big, train wreck type collisions. So you don't want to be risking that over and over again. So a lot of times we'll do, a lot of work on bags and a lot of drill work covering kicks and just little things like that. But I still think just like every other position that you coach, when you talk to guys about position coaching, and guys are really, if guys are really adamant about the position they coach and really in love with the position they coach, they'll talk to you for hours about EDDs or everyday drills or their indie periods, especially O-line guys. And I think that's awesome. And I think it's great for the game of football. But, you got to remember that once you are playing a certain position on special teams, you need everyday drills too. You need drills that you can do, whether it be kickoff or kick return. I mean, there's certain drills you should be doing. And I think sometimes when for me growing up where I made mistakes and then, when I would watch practices, it's kind of hypocritical sometimes as football coaches. We spend all this time doing drills and drill work and techniques and fundamentals with linemen and running backs and quarterbacks and receivers. And then when you go to special teams, it's all just team and scheme work. It's all just kickoff. Are we going deep? Are we squibbing? Are we going high? Are we whatever it is. And then it just becomes the scheme. And we don't spend enough time teaching the kids the techniques and fundamentals, but yet when we're on offense or defense, we sink all of our teeth into techniques and fundamentals. So it's just kind of that part of the special teams deal to me was always just a little bit funky with, and I was guilty of it when I was younger as well. Scheme, and never really teaching the fundamentals of it. So when attempting to block punts regularly, do you defend versus fakes? I definitely like the idea. Yeah, we almost always have, we make sure we have, if the other team gets kind of funky with who the eligibles are, you got to be careful sometimes. But if it's standard punt stuff, whether it's shield or pro spread punt, and who the eligibles are, we always try and get the eligibles covered. And then, and then we'll go after a punt. And we always have people that are there, to defend fakes. And obviously, a lot of times what we'll do is if, depending on if we're trying to get the punt up the middle, I might have all the eligibles accounted for, and then I might, send 4 hard from one side or the middle or whatever we're doing. And then I might have 2 guys that rush the outsides, take 3 steps and stop and make sure the ball's punted. You always want somebody, not only do you want to be, accounting for the eligibles and everything else, but at some time I think it makes sense to have people that are responsible for making sure the ball's punted and they have their eyes on the punter until the ball gets punted, and they don't leave or do anything until the ball gets punted. Because, a lot of times, even when you set up returns, I know we're talking about blocking punts right now, but a lot of times when you set up returns, if all your guys turn and run in hold-ups or whatever the scheme is, a lot of times the punter might hold on to the ball for another 4 seconds. You see these rugby guys that roll out, and then, they wait and they wait and they wait, and then they punt the ball. So we try and scheme up within even our punt blocks, we try and scheme up somebody, watching the punter to make sure the ball is punted and putting some additional pressure on the punter to make sure he punts the ball. Michael, I have done a video on YouTube on 2 punter systems. I got it from Division II school. Hey, Melvin, how you doing, bud? I got it from a Division II school, Ferris State, at a clinic I was at. They were doing it. They had a right-footed and a left-footed punter that they rugby-style punted, and they put both of them back next to each other, and you didn't know who they were going to snap it to, and it made it very difficult. When I was watching the clinic stuff and the guy was showing film, it made it very difficult for teams to block punts because they didn't know. They would usually rugby one way or the other, and they could rugby right or rugby left, and the coach said that eventually most teams in college just stopped rushing because they couldn't figure out where to bring pressure from. So they sent up more returns, and then they were able to, because of the rugby style, and then because of the way they punted, they were able to get people down the field. They had some like crazy net punt average, or the coach had brought up the stat, and it was just insane to see that they'd only given up like 20 yards all season in return yardage. It was just ridiculous. And then he had some funky formations with some really good fakes drawn up. So I have dabbled with it before. Felt like I never really had a good enough right and left-footed punter. We did it on JV one time because we felt like we had a right-footed and left-footed punter, and I felt like JV was a great place to try something like that. But I have seen that before, Michael, and I think it's awesome. Kickoff-wise, I've never used two kickers, Michael. Getting back to your other point, I just saw the two kicker system, and I was thinking about punting because we've done it. We've done it punting, and like I said, I got it from Ferris State. I've never used two kickers on kickoff, but I've seen it done before, and I think it's very interesting. And then when you start getting into onsides, I think guys like Kevin Kelly at Pulaski Academy in Arkansas, and I think guys like that made it really fun with all the onside kicks and the different deals that they were doing. I think that makes it exciting for kids and exciting for coaches. And like I said, I just wish there was more. I just wish there were more guys that were a little bit into special teams, and the fact that you guys are even here listening to us talk about special teams and bringing up some great points and great questions is makes me feel really good, because I just don't think it gets enough credence in the game, or enough. It doesn't get its due respect in the game. But the problem in high school sometimes when you talk about kickers or two kickers or kicking off, if you don't have a kicker, then you're stuck with either sky kicks or mortar kicks, or you're stuck squibbing a ball on the ground because you can't get it to the end zone. I mean, the perfect world, when you really want to obviously be good at it, but when you want to be able to do some things schematically, the perfect world in kickoff is when you have a guy that can kick it to the end zone, and then he can place it right, left, or high, short. Now you've got to defend everything as a kick return team, and I think that makes it really tough. When you can only sky or pooch kick, I think it takes a lot of time to defend that. I think you have to get lined up properly and teach kids how to fair catch kicks and when they need to fair catch kicks. And so I've always kind of hated playing against the teams that pooch or sky kick. But if that's all they do and the kicker doesn't have a leg to do anything else, I think you can get to a point with your returns and your schemes and your kids to where that really doesn't become as big of an issue anymore. When you have a guy that can do all of those things as a kicker, that's when it gets really exciting on kickoff. And when you got a guy that can onside the ball a couple different ways, he can onside it right and left, and you got some different onsides that you can use. That's when schematically it starts to get really exciting, and that's what I like to see when I try and hand special teams over to guys. I always try to tell them, hey guys, I know you're not an offensive coordinator or a defensive coordinator, but if you're going to do special teams, let's make it exciting. Let's have fun. Let's make it fun for the kids. Let's be sound. Let's be good at what we're doing. Let's not lose games just because we're trying to have fun, but let's make it interesting for the kids, because I think at the high school level, it's very hard to explain to kids how important special teams are. And it's very hard to explain to kids that if you can be a guy that plays on all 4 or 5 special teams, you can really help your team win. And so it's hard to sell kids on that fact. So I think sometimes you got to make it exciting to get kids involved to want to do it. You got to have some different things going on. And I want my coaches to learn different things, and I want them to push the envelope a little bit. So I always try and, tell my guys to get aggressive and have fun with it. Punters with longer yardage and short hang time, or punters with shorter yardage? And in high school, for me, I would prefer hang time. I think sometimes in high school you can outkick your coverage, and you get a kid with a really good leg and not enough hang time. And the discrepancy sometimes in the athletes in a high school game, the discrepancy between the kid that might be returning it and the kids that you have on the punt team. I would always choose hang time over. I would always choose hang time over yardage. I usually have one all the time, Michael, because I love special teams. I love doing it, but I always try and find somebody else to do it if I could. just because it takes a little bit of pressure off me, but also I think it gives people, whether it's a title or not, I think it gives people some initiative to grow, and I think it gives guys the initiative to get better at the game and study and learn more about the game. And anytime you can have a special teams coordinator or at least somebody else on your staff that does special teams, then I think the reason I've tried in the past when I could do it, the reason I try to assign a job on almost every special team. So if we're talking about kickoff and somebody's got the gunners and somebody's got the safeties or whatever it may be, whatever your terminology is, and you try to give that to a few different coaches, because then they have to study it, and then it's easier when you're watching film for them to understand what your opponents do on special teams. So the more guys you have involved, the more they have to. A lot of times, if your offensive or defensive guys don't have anything to do with special teams, they won't even watch that part of the game when they watch opponents. And I think whether it be looking at talent or preparation or within a game plan, I think you would want all your coaches to watch special teams, because I think you can find some flaws in some teams and some things that you can attack other than just offense or defense. So the more jobs you can give your guys that they have to coach, now you kind of force them to watch your opponent on special teams, and I want them to watch that. I don't want them to skip over all that stuff. Punt returners run from trying to return punts. We have a grenade call. We have returners. It's a bad punt. Yeah, we've always used poison or Peter or whatever it is to get away. A grenade call is perfect. And what we try and do a lot of the times with our guys, if we make that call, we try and have guys turn and sprint out of bounds to whatever sideline they might be on. We have guys try and turn and sprint, to the sideline, because you work on that all the time, and you make that call, and thank you, Ghoul. You make that call all the time, and then kids don't know what to do. And the fact that if you're not going to return it, you want everybody getting the hell away from the ball. Because here's the hardest part to me about special teams sometimes in high school. You forget to teach the rules to the kid because you know the rules and you assume everybody else does. And you'd be surprised how many kids on a punt return team think we have to fall on the ball unless you are really adamant about teaching that. You'd be surprised how many kids don't know that you need to fall on a kickoff, because kickoffs are live after 10 yards, but punts are not unless you touch it. And, you got to teach the rules about block punts and when they could be advanced, and so your kids know that. So if you block a punt and it goes past the line of scrimmage, I'm pretty sure I got to check the NFHS rules. I'm pretty sure it's the same, but generally speaking, in the college game, if you block a punt and it goes past the line of scrimmage, same thing with a field goal. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to. The other team can't advance that. They can't do anything. It's still going to be your ball. But yet, if you block a ball behind the line of scrimmage that stays behind the line of scrimmage now, for a field goal, for instance, how many times have you seen, even in the NFL game, where teams will block a field goal that goes forward, and somebody on their team will run to try and cover it, and then they'll end up, fumbling it or doing something, and then possession changes again. And now you're all pissed off because you got to tell that person, hey, look, that was our ball. You didn't need to do that. And then they come back and say, well, coach, nobody ever taught me that. Or you get a field goal that gets blocked behind the line of scrimmage and your guys think you don't have to do anything with it. And the other team picks it up and advances it for a first down or a touchdown. So many little rules and nuances like that, that kids don't know that you have to teach. I'll never forget the first year I was coaching girls softball. And we had a girl that bunted a third strike, and she stayed in the batter's box. And my head coach, who was my good friend and my Pop Warner coach growing up, he's screaming at the girl to go to the dugout. And she had no idea. And in between innings, he gets there and he starts, he's talking to the girl very sternly. And she said, "Coach, you never told me that." And he pointed his finger to make his next point, and he's red in the face and he's talking about, why would you bunt a third strike? I can't believe you did that, blah, blah. And she said, "Coach, you never taught me that." And he went to say the next word and he went, "You're right. I never did." And, it was embarrassing, but enlightening at the same time, because, something that is so simple within the game. I'll never forget 2 years ago. Uh, 2 years ago, we were playing a local team that always sky kicked or pooch kicked, and we worked on all the different pooch kicks all week long, and we worked on fair catches, and we worked on every single thing. And the first kickoff of the game, they pooched it just over the head of the guys that would fair catch it, and we tell them never to backpedal, and that now the returner has to come up and field that ball, and the returner takes 2 steps up and he just lets the ball lay on the ground, and the other team fields it, and it's the first kickoff of the game, and they feel they fall on it on a 20-yard line, and the very next play they throw a touchdown pass, and we're already down 7-0, and I said to that kid, he's a 12th grader. And I said, man, how did you not fall on that? We worked on it all week. And he said, Coach, I didn't know kickoffs were live after 10 yards. And I'm thinking, even though we worked on it all week and we worked on fair catching balls and we worked on recovering everything, I guess at some point I never actually said, if this ball's on the ground, you have to fall on it because it's live. I guess because I never said that, the kid, whether he freaked out, copped out, or whatever the deal was, he didn't fall on the ball. So, there's so many little things that you have to teach those kids. We outgained our opponent, eventual state runner-ups, but needed a last-second touchdown to win. Yeah, kick returns, big flip-the-field events like that, big plays like that, no matter how good you are, offense or defense, those things can happen all the time. So, and it's good, Brandon, that you're involved in something like that, because that's how you learn, how important special teams are. And it takes you getting burned one time, either not spending enough time on special teams or not putting enough credence into the practice work of special teams. And then you get burned in a game and lose. And then you go back and go, that's part, with experience comes wisdom. And, usually you don't learn unless you get burned somehow. If every situation turns out great for you, you never really learn. So until you get burned. So, stories like that are always great to understand how important it really is. How do you or any of the coaches set up kickoff return? To me, it feels like the hardest special team outside of trick plays. For us, Alex, I'm going to tell you something that we have done the last couple years, and I continue to do it. We almost never drop our frontline guys further than 8 to 10 yards anymore. We used to work all the time with the frontline guys sprinting 20 yards back and setting up all these different walls and wedges. And then obviously the rules have changed with wedges and walls and what you do and what you don't do. And then again, across the country, it might be different within the rules, because I know the NFHS has some different rules and other people play under different rules. But for us, it really had nothing to do with the rule book. It had to do with the fact that we'd spend hours upon hours teaching kids to turn and sprint 20 yards and then set up either the wall or find your guy or whatever it was. And I was studying something sometime, and a coach said that they only ran man return schemes, and they put 7 guys on the front line, and it was like a 7-2-2 type return scheme. And the 7 guys on the front line were all man players, and they only dropped 5 yards. They made sure that there were no onside kicks, and as soon as the ball went over their head, they dropped 5 yards and just latched onto a man. And he said for them, they just, they were tired of guys running around and never blocking anybody. And the coach brought up the point that it was a really difficult skill to teach certain kids in high school. So I listened to it and I looked at it and I said, this makes sense. And we started going to it. And we started blocking more man return schemes. And maybe we'd set up smaller walls or wedges, with the back guys, but the front guys were man players that rarely, if ever, dropped more than 6 to 8 yards. And we had a lot more success with it because we were making it kind of like a street fight deal where we were saying, hey, it's you and your guy. You got number 2, you got number 4, you got number 6. Sometimes I would do a deal with our guy and say, hey, look, if the guy you're assigned to makes a tackle, you've got an extra half cast or an extra something the next week or whatever. And we tried to, put some, just like penalties and things like that. You try to put some type of quote unquote punishment. That's not really a punishment. It's an extra that you're making them do to make sure they know how important it is. So if it's a man scheme and I tell you that you've got, however you number it, if you go right to left, left to right, and you just go 1 through 10 without the kicker, or you go L5, 4, 3, however you number it, if you tell somebody they're responsible for that guy and that guy makes the tackle, they've got something extra next week in practice, because you want to make it that important to say, hey, this is one-on-one. It's you and that guy, and he can't make the tackle. And we had a lot more success that way, simply because it was simpler. Our guys physically could do it, and it was less. Didn't cost us as much time. It was more time effective, and it was more time efficient, because it didn't cost us as much time. That the returns were nowhere near as exotic, so we could spend more time blocking and getting on guys and fielding kicks than we did, all the right, all the different returns. And then you have certain returns set up that have to change. If you got a right return and the ball's kicked to a different spot, there's just so much. There's just so many different nuances that go on that we just tried to make things a little bit simpler and go to more man-style returns. But I'm always interested in learning other stuff and how other people do it, and especially on special teams. 3 years ago, we lost on the last second Hail Mary because the onside kick. We recovered, but had to re-kick because our guy. Yep. Just simple things like that. Lined up wrong, lined up offside. You got a foot on the 50 or the 49 or whatever. All those little things can hurt you at some point. Living as an NFL special teams player, and our AC was an NFL kicker. Yep, that's one of those deals when you can get some guys on your staff that are former NFL guys or they were special teams players. I was fortunate enough, going back 6 years ago when I was at the first high school that I got my job, my first head coaching job at. I was fortunate enough that we got a guy from the Jacksonville Jaguars that got fired from the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I just happened to have a PE job open, and he had bounced around college and the NFL for a little bit, and he was tired of it, and his kids were going to school, and he wanted to stay in the area. And I was fortunate enough for 4 years that I had an NFL, a co-special teams coordinator in the NFL, whose dad was also the head coach of the Jets when I was growing up in the 80s. I had a chance to have him on my staff, and it was the best 4 years of my life because I never worried one time about special teams. All I had to do was tell him, hey, if you got a fake here, I'd like to use it. I wouldn't tell him what fake to use. He always had something drawn up. Hey, I'd like the onside here or whatever, or hey, I'm going to go for it here. We just talked strategically on the headset about down and distance and different things. And if we had a lead and he ever, he would ask me if I wanted to kick it deep or just keep it out of the returner's hands, just things like that. But I never one time schematically ever had to do anything or worry about anything. And it was the greatest 4 years of my life because I learned a ton of special team stuff from him. But at the same time, it was one less thing as a head coach that I had to worry about. We were always solid. We were always taught well. We were always very sound. It was great seeing a guy that had done it in the NFL do it because it was just a different animal, and the way he coached it and the energy that he brought to it was just a different animal that you don't see all the time because this was a guy who made his living coaching special teams. And when you watch somebody like that do it, it's pretty insane. It was great 4 years of my life as a head coach. You got to practice it, Brandon. You don't get good at anything unless you practice it. And like I said, earlier, it gets kind of hypocritical sometimes because you think you have to do all this certain work on offense and defense and cover all these scenarios. And, you spend an hour and 45 minutes doing it and then 15 minutes on special teams. And then you wonder why you're not very good on special teams. Or there's some guys that only do special teams 1 day a week. Maybe 1 day a week is their special teams day, and every other day they don't touch them or do them. And, it's kind of hypocritical because it is a part of the game. It's a third of the game almost snap wise. And it's one of the 3 phases in football that you got to be good at. So it's just amazing to me that people choose not to put time and effort into it. Yes, Michael, I agree. Guys do lose their jobs all the time, especially maybe not in high school, but college and the NFL, there's guys that lose their jobs all the time on special teams, and right, wrong, or indifferent. Sometimes it's not really them, but if you get a kicker that kind of goes south on you and he misses a bunch of field goals, I don't think that's the coach's fault, in my opinion. But, as long as they're not getting blocked and the protection's good, if you get a punter that starts shanking a couple or doing some things here or there, I think you get fired more when you're giving up returns in the kicking game, punt returns and things like that. I think you can get fired more for stuff like that, or at least you should, in my opinion. You shouldn't get, if you get a kicker that, or you don't have a kicker or whatever, I don't think you should get fired. Maybe one of the best to ever do it. Nick Saban has got to be one of the best to ever do it. And Alabama's field goal kickers are shaky at best almost every year. So, even the best suffer with stuff like that. So, but again, it's just for me, it's just such a neat and interesting topic. And I am an attacking style, gambling mentality style, type of guy. So, we're going to be muddle huddle. We're going to carry some fake punts. We're going to be aggressive in the kickoff game. We're going to try an onside when we have the right kick, when we have the right people. If I don't have a kid that can onside kick, and every time we do it, it's out of bounds or it doesn't go 10 yards or whatever, then, it becomes a waste of time. But all things said, I would like to be very aggressive. I would like to go after punts in the punt return game. If we could kick it deep, I'd love to kick it deep and cover and be aggressive with our coverage schemes and take some chances with onside kicks. I love muddle huddle stuff. We've actually, believe it or not, I've used muddle huddle on punt before. You kind of swinging gate, type stuff on punt. You can catch some people by surprise, and we've got a few first downs doing it. We've punted the ball with nobody rushing a couple times just because, the formation was so funky that they were worried about you faking it or doing something else, and they didn't even rush. So many little things you can do to take pressure off your protection schemes whether it's field goal, extra point, or punting. And to me, those things are all so exciting because when you can be different and you can be exotic and you can do some things that take pressure off as a coach, you always need to find ways outside of just pure talent. You always need to find ways either schematically or systematically to help lesser players out or lesser talented players out. So, when you can take the pressure off by doing some funky things that make people think and go, wait a minute, look at this formation. We can't have them fake a punt here. Let's make sure we get this formation covered. And then they don't even rush. And now you don't have to worry about getting a punt block. So just little things like that. Obviously, was it the Auburn-Alabama game last year when Auburn lined up with the punter? They put the punter in the game and they came out in the formation and lined the punter up at receiver and made Alabama burn a timeout and do something else. And, just because of a little systematic deal like that, where somebody's watching what group comes on the field. Alabama ran their punt return group on the field because the punter was out there, and then they lined up in an offensive formation because the quarterback never left. And next thing you know, Alabama got caught with 12 guys on the field, and the game ended that way. So, little things like that really, to me, those are the types of things, even though I'm an Alabama fan, those are the types of things that get your juices flowing when you see somebody win that little chess match like that. Like, that's really cool to me, and I enjoy it. 2-point conversions, to use a chart. I've always, last couple of years, I haven't had it with me, but I used to take one with me all the time, or somebody, my assistant coach in the booth on a headset would always have one to kind of let me know what we should be doing and what we should be thinking. And the one thing I can tell you about going for two, if you miss an extra point early in the game, don't start chasing two early in the game. I usually don't think about that chart until the second half, maybe when the game gets a little bit later, because early on you start chasing points, and if you're unsuccessful, you're just leaving points out there. So the one tip I can give you with the chart is, obviously the chart's there and it's good. It's good information to have. But if it's early in the game and you miss an extra point or fumble a snap or whatever it is, that very next one, if you're up 12-0, somebody in the booth is going to tell you probably to go for two, just because that's what the chart says. So I don't think you always necessarily use the chart. For me, in general, as a muddle huddle type deal, first touchdown of the game we score, we rip out and muddle huddle. If they don't line up right, I'm going to run a play I think that has a chance to get 2 points. And then, if we miss that and we come back out and we have another muddle huddle play, the chart would say definitely go for 2. But if we come out and they line up to the formation, I'll probably just shift and kick it early in the game and try and get a point back, because even though the chart says go for 2, it's too early in the game to start chasing points. So I think it's something that you don't think about until later, later in the game, in my opinion. If you have 2 or even close to you're winning that field position battle, hitting your extra points, field goals. Yeah, I think if it's 2 even teams, the one that is better on special teams is going to win. Hitting yardage again is the big thing. If one team can just field all their punts, even if they're fair caught, I think if one team can field their punts and win the hidden yardage, I think if you can get your punts off without being blocked and the field position getting flipped, little tips like every drive needs to end in a kick. So if you're on offense, if every drive ends in a kick, you have a decent chance. That means there's no turnovers. So you're either punting, kicking a field goal, or kicking an extra point. If every drive ends in a kick, you have a pretty good chance because you didn't turn the ball over. Just, little things like that, little tidbits of information. Every drive ends in a kick and you have a chance. That's kind of the way I've heard it said before. So, let's see. I think you should probably always go for 2 if you're down 14 and score. Of course, the feel of the game plays a role. But, I coach, talking about the chart and whatnot, I coach by my gut and my feel. A lot of the times I coach by adrenaline and momentum. A lot of the times there's times where, we may go for 2 when we don't need to, just because I think we've got the momentum, and that one, that 2-point conversion might slowly turn the dagger a little bit more. There's times where I don't go for 2 and I kick an extra point, maybe when I should go for 2. Now, obviously, never in a situation where it's late in the fourth quarter or in the game and I need to go for 2 to tie, and I go for 1 with 50 seconds left in the game. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about through the normal course of the game. I do coach a lot by gut feeling, momentum, flow of the game, so to speak. I think sometimes district games play a little bit different role in there. Rivalry games play a little bit different role. All those things that you got to consider. For me, Ruben, I usually carry at least 1 punt fake. I carry at least 1 punt fake and 1 regular field goal fake every week. I try to change my punt fakes every week unless I haven't shown it yet. If I haven't shown it yet, then I might carry 1 over to the next week. But once I show 1, I try and change and do something different. Here's another thing about special teams sometimes that I think you need to consider in the course of a game. There's times where if I am up 14, 21 points in a game, that's not over yet. And I'm not talking about running the score up on anybody, because that's something that I absolutely do not believe in. It's a big pet peeve of mine, and it drives me nuts when people do it. But there's times where I'll fake a punt where we really don't need to fake a punt, just to put it out, especially early in the season. We fake a punt out of our rugby or out of a certain formation just to put it on film so everybody has to see it. So there's times where, as the head coach, I can get away with it, obviously, as a head coach. But, there's times where maybe you're early, if we're near the 50-yard line and our defense is playing good and we're up 21 points in a game in the first half, I may fake a punt just to get it out there on film. There's times where, we line up in certain muddle huddle deals, even though I'm probably not going to run a muddle huddle play. We line up a certain way just to get it out there, because that team has to now understand, and take time in their practice, like Michael brought up earlier. There's times where, as a head coach, I'm playing a mental chess game for things down the road where I want teams to see, sometimes there's things that you don't do just because you don't want your opponent to see it. And then there's other times where I'll do things that I want, early in the season. If it's week 1 in the game, there's times where I throw a bunch of things out there that I want everybody to see the rest of the year, because now I may never do it again, but now they have to worry about it. So I kind of think of special teams that way sometimes too. But again, I'm the head coach. I can do things like that. So I find it interesting, though, because Coach Munkett of Army, I believe, does everything based on it. Yeah, I would say that the college and NFL guys do a lot of things more so statistically, and it's not only obviously they're trying to win games. I get it, But I think those guys worry about the press conferences afterwards. So a lot of times when they make decisions based on the book, the numbers, the stats, you can go into a press conference and say, hey, uh, statistics say that, you should punt in that situation or go for it in that situation. And then when the media starts humming you about certain decisions, you know, you don't have to feel like a riverboat gambler and say, well, probably a bad call, should have punted, should have done this. You can kind of try and win the press conference by doing things that were quote unquote by the book or statistically. So in my opinion, Brandon, I can't speak for everybody, but I think in the NFL, that's why you see way more data-driven, statistical-driven responses to different scenarios in the game, going for it, not going for it, punting, not punting, faking a punt, just because those guys want to answer the questions and win the podium at the end. And if your GM or, if your job's on the line and you make a risky call that ends up costing you the game, if it was a crazy, outlandish deal, now you got to answer to that. And sometimes in high school, you don't have to worry about that. But in college and NFL, I think those guys worry about that sometimes, so they play that data game. Go for 2 in OT to win. However, last year we did that and lost by not converting, and 2 teams tried against us and failed. Needless to say, my view on that has changed. I think that, Colton, I think that's situation-based. If you're on the road playing against a really good team that you don't think you can go shot for shot with and you score and have a chance to win the game, go ahead and try and win it. If you try and win it without even going into overtime, I don't think that's a bad deal. Obviously, if you're at home, statistics in the book says at home, you should probably try to play for overtime. But I think a lot of that has to do with your team, their team, who's better, who you think is better. Can you hang with them? If it's a game you thought you should have won to begin with, then you wouldn't mind going extra rounds in overtime because you still feel like until the game's over, you're the better team. So I don't think you necessarily have to change your mind on that, Colton. I just think you have to be a little bit statistically driven with those things. Analytics roles. This is interesting. I've always been interested in using that. Yeah, analytics are great, but I don't think, for me, I would never want to make my living that way because I think sometimes you miss the boat as much as the analytics can help you make certain decisions. I think there's a time where really good coordinators or head coaches do some things that they just feel are right at that time, whether it be the ebb and flow of the game or the momentum of the game. Sometimes I think you have to kind of fly by the seat of your pants sometimes, so to speak. How do you handle putting your best athletes on special teams versus giving them a rest? When we're in Florida early in the year, obviously rest is a big deal. Kids cramp. It's 95 degrees at kickoff at 7 o'clock. And the only way you can rest them is if you feel like you have adequate bodies that you're not going to give up big chunks of field position or returns or anything else. Because if you rest them and you're giving up huge plays, then you might as well have them out there tired because you've already lost the game anyway. So you got to have the bodies to do so. You got to have special teams guys to do it. But at the end of the day, if you don't have those, in high school, your best kids should play and your best kids should want to play. It always drives me nuts when I hear kids say that I'm a receiver, I don't play DB. I'm a running back, I don't play linebacker. I'm an O-lineman, I don't play D-line. When I grew up, I know it was the 80s and it was a different time period, but when I grew up, you never wanted to come off the field, so you told the coach you could play everything. You could play special teams, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation on YouTube Live, because I think that mentality is a dying breed. Reference to look at the possibilities. Something I thought as well, difficult call to make. I found a book called Evolution of the Game that has a ton of insane unbalanced formations. I think it could be good for 2 point. Yeah, anytime you can go unbalanced. The biggest thing with 2-point conversions, guys, that I could probably tell you as a guy who's coordinated both sides of the ball and been a head coach for 22 years, 2 things I think. The funkier you can be outside of your base offense, I think the better. And the more you can practice and rep 2 or 3 2-point plays that you like, that your kids know. So when that situation comes, hey guys, if we need to, this is our 2-point play from this unbalanced formation. We've worked on it for 5 weeks now, or whatever it is. I think that's something that also needs to be practiced and needs to be thought about as head coaches. Like, what are your 2-point plays? What are you going to run? Do you have specific things that you like? And Alex, it's a great point. If you could be funky, with unbalanced formations. I know that was always for me a lot of times on fourth down. Depending on the personnel I had in the game, if I was going to go for it on fourth and short, depending on the personnel I had in the game, there's a lot of times I would jump in with that personnel. I'd jump into something funky, whether it was unbalanced or short huddle, sugar huddle, stuff like that, without changing personnel because it's tough to line up to. Obviously, 2-point plays, you have a chance to change personnel. They just scored it. The game's going to stop before that extra point. But anytime you can be a little bit different, I think your chance of success will go up. So unbalanced formations are neat little wrinkles. But again, I think if you had one or two unbalanced formations that you loved and one or two plays from each one that your kids knew like the back of their hand, now when you go in, your kids feel like, hey, we've practiced this for 5 weeks. Let's roll. So case by case, a general rule I think is two-way starter. I don't want to play in special teams. Yeah, if I have a two-way starter, I don't like him on special teams either. But if the kid I put in for him on special teams can't make a play and I'm giving up 50-yard returns or house calls or getting punts blocked, then that two-way starter on the side is doesn't do you a lot of good. So how often do you see issues where punt returners don't line back far enough in a punt? I don't see in high school personally where I've been for 22 years. I don't see punts go over their head. The problem for us that I see is more punts that land in front of us that we don't field, and then they roll for 30 yards. And kids not being able to fair catch punts. Returners not being aggressive and running up to fair catch punts and get their hands on punts is a bigger problem for us than it is. But again, that's all work you do on scouting. That's all work you do pregame based on the wind. You watch punters punt. You got a guy that somebody should be on a clock. You should already do it on film, but live when you get there, somebody should be looking at their kids warm up and have a stopwatch that when a snapper's snapping, what's the snap to kick time. There's a lot of times, you might have some punt block stuff drawn up that you feel really good about, and you get there and whoever's in charge of it comes over and says, hey, coach, it's 1.9 snap to foot. I don't think we can get there even with our best punt block. That might change what you do that game. You may use more returns that game because you get there live and the long snapper is way better than you thought. You might get there and the long snapper is struggling that day, or on the clock it's 2.7, and all of a sudden you go, hey, coach, I didn't see this on film, but he really doesn't get that ball back there anywhere near as quick as I thought. I think we can block one. So little information like that, I think you have to be looking at and using stuff like that to see what you're going to do. And then when they're warming up in pregame, you're always looking at the kickoff guys, how are they kicking it, and then the punters, so that whoever's in charge of the punt returners can tell him from wherever the line of scrimmage is, hey, move up 5, move back 5, and then obviously wind and other things. But punting is so inconsistent in high school. It's crazy trying to get guys lined up. In my opinion, I think we struggle more with balls that hit the ground that we don't fair catch, in my opinion. I use a lot of stuff for my base offense for 2-point plays, Ruben. So we'll use a lot of our read game or quarterback runs with multiple fullbacks and get 2 blockers to the perimeter and run our read game, or maybe some waggle or sprint out stuff. But you should always have 2 or 3 2-point plays that are only 2-point plays, and that's the only reason you practice them and work on them, and then your kids will be more comfortable and confident. If you don't think you can hang with them, no, you can't. Just go for it, just like UNC Clemson. Yeah, I think you see that in college all the time. And I know in high school for me, I don't know where you guys are or what programs you're at, but there's a lot of years where 70 to 80% of the games we play, we might off the bus, we aren't favored or we don't have a chance. So, your game plan, the things you do, trick plays, onside kicks, usually, generally speaking, as a head coach, there's games where you got to roll the dice and you got to take chances, and those are the games. And then there's games where you should be better than the other team and you should probably take less chances. But everybody's got a personality, everybody's got a philosophy, and I try not to change that style all that often. But there are games I'll go in and play teams that I don't think we can stay within 4 touchdowns of because they got 8 Division I players, or maybe we're not very big on either side of the ball and they're big and physical and we can't stop them from running the ball. And those are weeks where I'll just tell the coaching staff, hey, guys, we got to have a couple fakes drawn up. We got to get after a punt. we need a turnover or 2 or 3. I know as a defensive guy all the time, we'll look at certain teams we're playing or certain schemes we're playing, and we might set a goal to say, hey, look, if we get 2 stops and a turnover, we got a chance to win this game. I don't know if we're going to get more than 2 stops, and I don't know if we'll get any turnovers, but if we get 2 and a turnover, we have a chance to win this game. That's our goal. If you're playing somebody that scores 45 points a game, and their offense just rolls and rolls and rolls everybody they play, you got to come up with an idea to say, hey, guys, here's the goal this week. We're not shutting them out. We're not holding them under 28. They haven't been held under 28 yet. And it's not – a lot of people sometimes look at that and they think that you're talking down to your kids. No, you're not. You're just using analytics and data to say, hey, look, they average 42 points a game. We got to slow this game down. 2 stops and a turnover, maybe a special teams change here or there. When I talk to our return teams, punt return or kick return, the first thing I tell them all the time, the number one priority is that this down has to end with our ball. It's our ball. If they punt, it's our ball when they kick off. At the end of this down, regardless of what happens, it has to end with our ball. And if you can do that throughout the course of the season and throughout the course of games, I think you'll have a chance of winning more games, because you don't give turnovers field position. So just little things like that. Is there a unit where you try to get some lesser players on in order to get some hardworking kids playing time? For us, it's punt block. Yeah, it's always been a punt block type deal where if you have some kids that work really hard, but they're lesser players, you can get them in there to try and go after punts or whatever it may be. It's usually not kickoff, obviously, because that's a big play waiting to happen, and it's usually not punt because that's a big play waiting to happen. So there's sometimes on kick return if a kid's a hard worker and we're blocking man schemes up front. Maybe he doesn't run the greatest, but he's not afraid to stick his nose in there, and he can handle onside kicks. I might throw him on the front line of kick return sometimes. I'm not saying throw him out there to get somebody hurt or injured, but if he's a kid, that's a place where every once in a while I might hide somebody, but usually never kickoff and usually never punt. That's a great question, though, Colton. Our returners let it. Ruben, we just spoke about that. That's, to me, if you ask me the issue we have, if you ask me about the issue that we have, it would be not fielding punts, not the ball going over our head. So that would be my opinion. If you ask me, sorry. Well, you got Kevin Kelly, who started all that stuff at Pulaski Academy, and he's won a lot of state titles. He's had a lot of great success. He's made a great name for himself. The data was statistically driven with somebody from Princeton, I believe. When he originally did the data, he had somebody from Princeton or an Ivy League graduate put all the data together. And to me, I would think personally there should be a fine line between being a very aggressive coach and then sometimes doing things that are just no-brainers. But hell, I don't have a state title, may never win a state title, and that guy's got a bunch. So it's kind of hard for me to argue with it's hard for me to argue with a system like that. But some guys out there do it just to get a name. Some guys out there do it just to prove a point. But that guy has done it and won state titles with it, so I'm not going to argue with him. Huge upstate in the state semis. The favorite had double-digit D1 players. The underdog had one. They played keep away. Yeah. Time of possession is also an interesting stat because time of possession is only important if the other team's not scoring every 2 minutes. So when Oregon was in their heyday with Chip Kelly and, obviously that's how teams tried to play them, but there'd be games where the time of possession was 30 minutes to 10 minutes and Oregon still had 50 points because they scored every 45 seconds. So I think that's a great point, Brandon. And obviously, if you're going to upset somebody, I think obviously that's the way you probably need to do it. But they obviously played defense really well because if that team had that many Division I players and they were that good, even in those 11 minutes, they could have scored more points than they did. So, the time of possession was huge, taking the air out of the football, so to speak, is the term that people use all the time. Taking the air out of the football is huge. But they also at some point played decent defense because in the 11 minutes that the other team had the ball, they didn't give up 40 points. Ran the ball 50 to 55 times, 4 yards per carry. Yep, that's pretty good. block PAT was the difference, which makes special teams a great point, like we're talking about tonight, and then also stop the 2-point conversion. The thing about that, Brandon, and obviously when there's games like that, hey, Karoga, how are you doing? Glad you could be here tonight. Love everybody in Brazil. Again, hopefully we can get down there. The interesting thing about that, Brandon, is you getting your kids to understand that every point is important. It drives me nuts when we set up how we want to block field goals or extra points and the other team scores, and our kids are so dejected that they score a touchdown that we don't line up and execute the field goal block on the extra point. That's obviously an attitude problem. That's a culture problem. But it's also a problem not understanding that every point is important. So just because you gave up a touchdown, 7 points is worse than 6. Why would you not try and keep that other point off the board? Or, when kids get frustrated and rough the kicker on a ball that they had absolutely no chance to block, and now the other team kicks off from, the 45, and either they, if they're smart and good enough, they pooch it inside the 5 and make you return it. Now you got the ball at the 10, or they onside kick on you because the field position is no different. And now you got to go back and explain to that kid, hey, look, you got upset. You let your emotions get the best of you. You roughed the kicker on a ball that you had no chance with the angle you took, no chance to block. And, you did that because you were upset and you were mad that the other team scored, or maybe we were losing by 2 touchdowns. And now look what happened because of it. So just like the rules, and teaching kids special teams, rules and when ball's alive, when the ball's live, when it's not live. I think teaching the situations of every point, 2-point conversion, 1-point conversion, muddle huddle, stealing a point, getting the kids to understand how important those points are. And then when you could take a game like that, Brandon, and use it with your team to say, hey, remember this upset last year where this team blocked the PAT, stopped the 2-point conversion, got a 2-point conversion and won by 1 point in this huge upset. You got to go back to that and show your kids and say, hey, that's why you play every down, every snap, every rep, and that's why you play every point, because it could mean something. Here on Brazil, low-level football, missed extra point or 20 to 30-yard field goal make a lot of difference, and happens a lot. Yeah, because, my knowledge, Karoga, would tell me in Brazil you have more soccer players and more guys that should be able to kick a football, so you should be able to find kickers. And then if you can work on the protection and the snaps and the holds, you should have guys that can kick field goals. But that's similar to our high school football here. There's a lot of teams that don't have a kicker and go for 2 every time. I mean, you see it in high school football a lot, and if not a lot, more often than you'd ever see it anywhere else. But, finding a kicker is tough in high school sometimes. Thank you, Coach Flores. Always a pleasure. But was block kicks, blocked 4 or 5 of the year, was over the opponent. Yeah, I think throughout the course of the year, if you look at stuff like that, Brandon, and you've blocked 4 or 5 kicks and you haven't had any blocked, I think things like that. Obviously, it's game by game, and if you block a kick in a game where the other team beats you by 40 points, obviously it doesn't matter as much. But I think just statistically speaking or analytically speaking, if you block 5 kicks in a year and don't have any blocked, you probably even if you weren't a good football team, you're probably in more games than you shouldn't have been, or you might have won more game or 2 games than you should have. Even if you go 3-7, 2 of those wins might have been games that you shouldn't have won, but you won because you blocked the kick and nobody blocked one on you, because those are momentum deals. They're field position, field flippers in the hidden yardage game and the field position game. So they're big momentum deals, backbreakers sometimes. So when you can block a couple and not have any blocked, I think that's, and it's a good mindset to hang your hat on for the future of your special teams program, because now you can sell to those kids how important it is, and you've had kids that have done it. Sky kick seems to me like something that could be a change. Keep the second row to kick off on their toes. Yeah, one of the things I mentioned earlier, Rob, was if you have a kicker that can do both, I think it's really dangerous. If you can kick deep and sky kick, now they have to honor the deep kick. The upbacks have to be able to understand how to fair catch the ball, but at the same time, they have to honor the fact that you can kick it inside the 5 or to the, possibly to the goal line. The teams that always sky kick, they're really a pain in the neck to practice against. But once you do it enough and you see a few of those teams and your kids get the feel of it and they can't kick it over your head, I think it becomes a little bit easier to defend. To me, the troublesome teams are the kickers that can do it all. So the kid that can kick it deep inside the 5, the kid that can sky wherever he wants it, right or left, and then the kid that is great with onside. When you play a team that can do all of those things, that week is really hell on your kickoff return or on your special teams coordinator, because it's way tougher to defend all that than it is to just say, hey, or a kid that can do it with the same approach. A lot of times on sky kicks, one of the first things you look, two things you look at: where are the laces pointed? What is the kicker's approach? You watch guys on film and he'll take a 3-step approach and it's always a sky kick, and then he takes 5 steps and it's always deep. Little things like that are a tip off. So the kid that can take the same approach and sky kick it or deep kick it, onside kick it with the same approach, that's the kid you got to worry about. If he can kick it with the laces being the same way, that's the kid you got to worry about. If he's got to turn the tee and turn the laces and take a 3-step approach to sky kick it, yes, it's effective, but it's a little bit easier to coach against. So 7-2, lost in the second round, but our special teams was quite bad. Besides punt block, lost the game on a blown kickoff coverage. We won the league. Yep, that'll hurt you. And then I'll bet you that's why you guys probably spent a lot more time on special teams. Week 3 versus a very good talented team. We outplayed by a decent bit, but 2 block punts, 1 for a touchdown, almost won us the game. Yeah. I mean, again, I think there's on both sides, winning and losing, and the good and the bad. I think if you do this job long enough, like I said, I've got 22 years as a head coach or 21 years as a head coach. So I've seen about everything. We lost the game one time. Leon Washington went to Florida State and then played for the Jets and the Seahawks, and he was in the NFL for 10 or 12 years, and he was a stud tailback in high school. He was Florida Mr. Dairy Football Player of the Year in our classification, and he was returning kicks, and obviously we knew we didn't want to kick to him, and we jumped out on this team 14-0, and it was a night that had a little bit of wind to it, and in warm-ups, kicking a certain direction, our kicker put it 5 yards into the end zone every time. So we scored to make it 14-0. And my special teams coach at the time on the headset says, hey, coach, go in this direction. He's put it 5 yards deep. And the first 2 kicks of the game went into the end zone. And he said, hey, coach, all right, we're still going in the same direction. You want to kick it, deep? And I said, can we get it to the end zone? He said, well, all pregame, he got it to the end zone, and the first 2 went in the end zone, and we kicked and he missed it, and it went to about the 2-yard line, and Leon Washington fielded it and took it back 98 yards, and that kind of flipped the game on us, and we lost 28-14 eventually. And so, just little things like that, you'll always remember that, and analytically, statistically, it was the right thing to do. And the first 2 kicks went to the end zone, and we knew which way we were kicking, and we warmed up both ways in warm-ups, and we knew where we could kick it into the wind. And so something like that you'll never forget. You'll never ever forget a situation like that. Or if you get beat by a fake field goal, you'll never forget that if you didn't prepare right to defend it. Or if you get beat by a fake punt, you're never going to forget stuff like that. So again, like anything else in the world or in life, you learn a little bit more when you get burned. So you got to go through all that. You got to be able to go through all that and live and learn, and especially with special teams. If a head coach gets burned by a couple of those scenarios, you can probably guarantee the rest of his career, he's always going to make sure that they practice those things, or even certain scenarios where you come out and say, hey, next week in practice, we will do a drill that focuses on this so we don't get beat on it. And, whether it be like a punt block that a kid fell on that he shouldn't have fell on, or you fumble the ball or something like that, you'll then, a lot of times great innovations or inventions come out of necessity, and, something will happen like that where you lose a game or something occurs to make you lose a game. And then that next week you'll come up with a drill, or you'll call somebody that has a drill to help with that because you never thought about it, didn't think it was important. And then all of a sudden it costs you a game. And now you're like, well, that'll never happen again. So you live and you learn with stuff like that. That's, again, the more stories like that you have, the more experience. With experience comes wisdom. And that's why my sideburns are gray and my beard is gray. And, as you get older, hopefully you get a little bit smarter, but I've seen so many different things, and on the good side and the bad side of it. And I've done a lot of things that worked out really well and said, man, that helped us win that game. And then I've done some things that said, man, why the heck did I do that when I could have just punted or kicked an extra point? Why did I go for two? Or so, I mean, you live and you learn that way, in my opinion. But I'm just glad to see that there's so many guys on here tonight that can talk special teams and ask great questions about special teams and talk theoretically and philosophically about special teams. Obviously, every time we do these YouTube lives, you never really know, A, who's going to be here, B, how many people are going to be here. It doesn't bother me one bit. I do it. If there were 2 people here, I'd do it. If there were 200 people, I'd do it. That's not why I do it. But you always worry about with the topic, when you put a topic on there, if I set up a YouTube live to do special teams, will anybody listen? But, some of the questions and the interactions tonight were as good as any we've had. So it's good to see that there's people out there that understand how important special teams are. It's good to see that there's people out there that want to get better coaching, with special teams. So, it's and again, it's an interesting, intriguing topic that I think you can get really exotic with the schemes. I don't think it needs to be boring. I think it can be as interesting and as fun as you want to make it for your kids. I think is the one thing I think that's consistent from everybody that was in this room tonight. You have to make it important. Your coaching staff has to make it important. If your head man, if you're not the head man at your school and your head man makes it important, I think that's even better. So just interesting little tidbits like that make the game really fun. And as a third phase of the game, it's something you have to do. So why not talk about it? So going on about an hour and 15 minutes, I'll keep it up about another 5-10 minutes if anybody has anything else out there. But while we're still on and you guys are still here, if we're going to do one again next week, obviously football for us in Florida has been pushed back. We can't start practice till August 24th. Don't know when we're going to start playing games. So obviously I have another 3 weeks or a month without game planning and film and huddle watching and things like that. So if you guys have what other topics the next time we go live? Is there any individual topic you want to talk about? Is there anything on offense you want to talk about? Anything on defense you want to talk about? If you guys want to throw out some ideas about YouTube topics that you want to see, because obviously I'll be able to continue doing more of these in the upcoming weeks because I don't have game plans. I don't have a lot of huddle film that I have to watch and practice film that I have to watch. So I'll still have, we don't go back to school until August 24th or 25th. So even though I'm back to work as an 11-month employee, I'm back to work on the clock right now, but I still have a lot of free time on my hands. So yeah, we could talk about defensive fronts next time, Chase, or how to identify those fronts or how different people identify them. I'd be interested to hear how everybody else identifies them. How fancy they get with front sheets and is every little technique, do you have 50 fronts that you identify and it's different if a guy's in a shade or a 2-eye or I'd be interested in how people go about that because I know there's a lot of ways to do it, but also there's a lot of guys that get a little bit more exotic with it. Probably need a good O-line guy in here to kind of talk about how they ID fronts or how they teach their center or do they teach their center or quarterback to ID fronts. And, I think that's a great topic, Chase. I appreciate you bringing that up. Trying to think of what else. Obviously, for me, when I do these YouTube lives too, I'm always trying to learn something. So it's always on topics that I might want to hear somebody else talk about. So I'm always trying to think about not only things that I want to talk about, but things that I want to hear about. So kind of selfishly, when I do YouTube live stuff, it's kind of a topic that I also want to listen to and see what you guys think. And because that's how you learn. And at least that's how I learn. You may never tell anybody, when you host a YouTube live like this, or you do a chalk war with somebody or a virtual clinic with somebody, what people out there don't know is a lot of the times I'm trying to learn as much as they are just because I'm the one speaking. I'm trying to learn as much as everybody else. So to go through these interactions and to see things in the chat box that people talk about is always interesting to me because I peek at the chat box not only to respond, but I look at the responses in the chat box and I'm like, you know what, that's pretty good. I like that. That makes sense. I'm going to use that. I'm going to steal that. So, it's always topics that I want to talk about, but I also want to learn about. So I'd also be interested in looking at how people determine what they use in quick game and what they use in drop back theories like stick and stick nod and some other theories. Wonder how many guys how they classify what's quick game, what's drop back, when it changes for the quarterback, when they change the drops, what parts of their concepts they think they can go with quick game steps and what part doesn't time up and needs drop back steps. I did a Patreon video the other day on a 3x1 deal I saw the 49ers running that I really liked. But the thing I couldn't figure out for me is how our quarterback would drop if it was going to be quick game or intermediate drop back. So was it going to be punch one or was it going to be a quick three and try and throw that ball when his back foot hits the ground? So I'm always interested in looking at how people determine what is really quick game for them and what is drop back for them. I know some people have gotten away from quick game because of RPOs. That's something that I don't believe in personally. I still carry quick game even though we throw RPOs, but I'm always interested to see with certain spacing concepts. And obviously there's things when you're throwing a ball down the field that can't be quick game just because of the routes, but there are certain intermediate underneath routes with spacing concepts and things I see guys in the NFL do that I was always interested on how people would dictate or what they would call that to see what kind of drops or what drops they would take for that. I'd also, in the future, I'd like to talk about what guys are doing against tight front stuff since we're going to see so much tight front, what offensive guys are doing against tight front, plays that they like against tight front, things that have worked, things that haven't worked. And then I'd like one time, if anybody else out there plays it, I'd like to talk about Rip Liz match one time, cover 3 Rip Liz match stuff because we don't play it, but I'd like to study it a little bit more. We don't play it because it doesn't. Our other pattern match stuff is hard enough to teach our kids. I don't want to teach them another pattern match, but Rip Liz match was always intriguing to me because I think as soon as you get into 5-man zone pressures, you already have a system of teaching with match, carry, deliver that's already been taught. So Rip Liz match is interesting to me. I'd love to get some guys that are have a lot of success running wide zone in high school. I'd like to get some guys on here that have run wide zones effectively so we could talk about that, talk about how you have to practice it, what the best way to practice it is, what the best mesh is, can you do it from the pistol, because that's something that we're looking at, and I always have to fiddle around with it because we haven't really done it a lot, so I've got to take all the things that I have learned and all the things, the videos that I've watched and then take it out on the practice field and try and fiddle with the steps and the exchange of the quarterback and the tailback and then fiddle with how we want to do the line. What's the best way to teach this? Pod work, half line work. So I'd be interested in. So we've got a couple coming up. So for the next couple of weeks, we've got identifying defensive fronts. We've got, I'd like to talk about Rip Liz match. I'd like to talk about wide zone. I actually saw that, Chase. I think it's either when he was with the Dolphins, before he was with the Dolphins, he was with LSU maybe. I've watched a lot of the Dolphins. There's a lot of YouTube clips on the Dolphins playing Rip Liz match when Saban was there. And then there's a clinic way back in the day of him at Michigan State doing it. And then there's another one out there, I think, of him at LSU. So I've seen a bunch of those, Chase. I appreciate you bringing that up. And yes, it was interesting. And in that original video, I think that's when he talked about Dan Marino. The reason they developed Rip Liz match, pattern match, cover 3 was because they were playing so much country, America's cover 3, country spot drop cover 3, and the NFL guys were ripping it apart. And he actually talked about when he was with the Browns, Dan Marino made a couple throws against their cover 3 stuff, and he was like, "We got to do something different because they find too many seams and windows here in our cover 3 stuff," and that's how Rip Liz match came about. The other thing I'm also interested in learning about and talking about is, I don't know if you saw the article that came out this year with one of the position coaches at Ohio State talking about how much spot drop cover 3 they play, the old traditional spot dropping, hook curl flat, and, reading the quarterback and breaking on the ball and stuff like that and not matching patterns. So to hear that, I was always to me, it was under the impression, and I thought, my opinion, you could spot drop and play cover three in high school and be really effective. You didn't have to match patterns in cover three. And obviously, most people would argue against that. So then when you see somebody like Ohio State doing it, it gives you a little bit more, gives that argument a little bit more legs to say, hey, well, if Ohio State can do it, then obviously we can do it. So I'd be interested in talking about not only Ripley's match cover three, but can you still play spot drop cover three? Idea is one thing I've been trying to get better at is identifying defensive fronts and looks. It's something I have trouble with at times. Yeah, I guess we can talk about that. I just don't know how much help I'm going to be with that because as a tempo guy, I really don't look at fronts a lot. A lot of times we call plays before the front is even lined up. Obviously, our center has to ID things, and we have to know how we want to block that front. I'm not saying that we don't, I'm not saying we don't practice against different fronts. I'm not saying that we don't ID fronts. What I'm saying is for me as a play caller, I never even look at the front. I've already called a play before the front's been called. And then, for me, I've always had answers built in with RPOs and access throws and things to handle loaded boxes or the three techniques not where you want them. So I may not be the greatest help in IDing defensive fronts because it's just not something that I spend a lot of time doing per se. Yeah, I'd love to have maybe invite somebody on here that is really good at wide zone and they can answer the questions. I know Coach Cadutti in Texas, somewhere in Texas, is really good with it. And I've watched his YouTube stuff and he's outstanding with it. So maybe if we can get somebody on here as a guest in the chat box and I'll do the YouTube live, but all the questions go to them and then, or if I can get a Zoom call on YouTube live somehow, get somebody in on a Zoom call on YouTube live and then people could ask questions in a chat box and then that person could talk about it and answer them. So maybe that's something we set up. Maybe I try and find a wide zone guy that I can get on a Zoom call and put that onto YouTube live and do a deal that way. Yeah, I mean, I think the underneath parts of the zone blitz when they weren't as good as they got to with match carry deliver stuff, I think, because when you really think about it, if you want to talk about, like somebody brought up the point earlier, the book, The Evolution of Football, the evolution of the zone blitz was really back in the day where 50 teams would void a zone out because forward passes weren't as big of a deal. And until Sid Gilman and vertical passing game and, understanding how to space things out based on coverage because the defense can only have X amount of underneath droppers. All the 50 teams back in the day, both ends would rush and they'd only drop three guys underneath and they would just void the flat into the boundary or some deal like that. And then all of a sudden, when teams started getting exotic with coverages, that's when it became a fire zone type deal because you were playing, these zone coverages behind your pressures. But you were playing tighter matching zone concepts. And all of a sudden, the evolution of football when guys were rushing 5 and only dropping 6 for years upon years as a base defense, all of a sudden that became a fire zone or a zone blitz per se. When guys way back in the day, 70, 80, 90 years ago, they were voiding zones out all the time. But that's because forward passing wasn't as relevant and it wasn't as exotic as it is now. So they just played the game the way they knew how. And they defended the things that they needed to defend. And then all of a sudden it becomes a fire zone or a zone blitz. So the history of the game, when you study it, is interesting too. That's how you learn about the evolution of the game and things like that. And even different fronts when you go back in the day and you figure out, I had always wondered why Okie front was called Okie front. And, Bud Wilkinson was one of the originators of the Okie front and he happened to be coaching at Oklahoma at the time. And I'm pretty sure that's where Okie front came from, so I was always interested in, where did bear front come from? You got, 2-3 techniques. It's double eagle. The side that you reduced out to is usually called the eagle side. And now you're playing double eagle. And then all of a sudden the bear front, which obviously people ran that front before the Chicago Bears were playing it. Maybe, I guess because I'm of that time age bracket or time period, maybe before that, it wasn't bear front. Maybe it was double eagle, and then it became bear front because of the Chicago Bears. I mean, those are the things I think about because that makes sense to me. So theoretically speaking, from a technique standpoint, that should be a double eagle defense. But then again, at the same time, you could play a double eagle defense without covering the nose. You could play a double eagle defense without covering the nose. So you can't just say double eagle because that's double three techniques, or double reduction. So the bear front is now the nose with 2-3 techniques. So, little things like that, or, the over front, the under front, I mean, you could think about it 9 different ways. And obviously it was over or under from the tight end, but, things get named and then guys started naming fronts by technique. So some guys would play 53 fronts and 52 fronts and 51 fronts and 55 fronts. And so defensive fronts, I think that's a great topic, Chase, and something we could probably really get into because there's a million ways to do it. So, yeah, you talking about like A gap inside pressure cross dogs from 3-4 stuff, or David? You're talking about like the way the Steelers used to do it all the time with their odd front stuff and bringing. Now you see it you see the crossfires with the Mike and the Will from even front so much because the 1 or the 2 eye, it's easy to spike him to the B gap. The odd stuff used to be a little bit more difficult because your nose had to get to a B gap, so you can bring that crossfire in. But any crossfire zone pressure to me is it's tough for the O-line to pick up. It's usually solid in the run game, and it's usually safe on the back end because you're zone pressuring it. Okay. Yeah, so obviously if you got odd front stuff and you got somebody on the nose, obviously you can pick that center and kind of work how you want to do that. With the nose ripping and pulling the center one way and then bringing backers into the A gap opposite of that. Yeah, maybe I'll do Chase a video on fronts one day. But been at it an hour and a half, guys. So getting late, 10:30. Appreciate everything you guys do for the channel. Appreciate everything you guys do for Play Fast Football. Thank you for being willing to listen when I want to get on live and talk. And tonight, thank you for so many comments, so many great points. Hi-hats, texting the flex tackle in week 50 end. Now, when you say low hat, hi hat, David, is that because it changes if you get a low hat or a high hat, or is that just a technique you teach as far as, either your penetrator or your looper or whatever it may be? Looked it up in case anyone was still curious. It was Ohio State's DB coach. Yeah, I don't know. I forget what his name was, but he did an article somewhere or talked at a clinic about it, and he talked about how they get way more reps and different guys can rotate, with their different insertion points. They can have so many different insertion points because they're only teaching certain drops. So all these guys know, and they called it something different. They called it a little bit different. With their terminology, but he was talking about how they could, their insertion points could be so multiple because everybody on the team knew, they knew how to, be a hook dropper or a curl dropper or a flat dropper, and they only called it, they called the 2 inside drops something and the 2 outside drops something, and then they could be so multiple in their insertions because everybody knew not only the technique of the drop, but they knew the names right away. So, they'd be strong rotated, weak rotated, whatever they would do, and they would, they'd be able to do it a different way because that guy said, hey, all right, so when we rotate 3 strong, you're the hook, you're the this, or you're the whatever the terminology was. But it was just so interesting for me to see because when you see a team that is, one of the blue bloods in college football doing something like that, right away, the first thing you say to yourself is obviously we can do it. If nobody from college comes out and says they're doing that, and you say that as a high school coach, some people are going to argue with you because they've never seen it, and they're going to say, no, you need to play Rip Liz match. You can't spot drop cover 3. And then when he comes out and does it, all of a sudden it's like, okay, you can do that, and it gives a lot of validity to the argument. So yeah, he was Mike Doss was a great player. it sounds more like Jeff Hafley than Tabor to me. That's just my opinion. And I don't know if he might even have been their, I don't know if he was their special teams coach or their, um, you know, linebacker coach, maybe. I forget what he was, but Jeff Hafley um, seems, sounds more familiar to me from that article. Yeah, David, you'd be obviously you played with guys like that, so you understand. But a lot of people don't understand that there's a lot of great players in the NFL that can only do certain things. When the Jags drafted Reggie Nelson, and Florida was a predominant at that time with Reggie Nelson, he was a one high player, and then the Jags got him, and he struggled for a little while, and then all of a sudden he went to the Browns, and he went to the Bengals, and his career, had a little resurgence in it, and you found out that he was basically a one high safety that was allowed to just play ball. He was a guy that was told to play ball, run around there, and he raced things and didn't play a lot of coverages, didn't play on a hash mark a bunch, didn't play a lot of pattern match. He was just a dude in the middle of the field making a bunch of plays. And then when he got into an NFL system that allowed him to do that a little bit more, he became a good player again. But at that time, I forget who was coaching defense with the Jags, but when he was with the Jags and they were trying to play some quarters and some too high stuff, he couldn't do it. And then you take a guy like, Sanders comes in and, they run just Tampa 2 and some inverted rolled insertion stuff because that's what Bob Sanders can do. So as good as those guys are and as talented as they are in the NFL, there's some of them that can only do certain things and they have to cater it to them, which is amazing to me because they're so good. But some of those guys really only have a skill set to do certain things. So, but again, guys, I appreciate everything you do. All the questions, conversations tonight are great. We'll do it sometime next week. And probably since there's so much talk about it, we'll talk about defensive fronts and how everybody goes about identifying those defensive fronts. Maybe we'll just take different opinions and guys can give their answers on that and we'll roll from there. But appreciate it, guys, as always. Thanks for everything you do. Thanks for being here, David. Thanks for those that blitz talk right there, and the odd flex blitz that right there is worth its weight in gold. And then the Bob Sanders concept is worth its weight in gold to know that NFL teams only did certain things because of certain players. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks everybody else for the comments. Thanks for everything you do for PlayFast Football, and I'll catch you guys sometime next week. See you. Stay safe out there, guys. Thanks, Rob.